I come from the Philippines, and my province has an area called the Brookside Valley Border. I don't know what some other guys call this little hill, but valley viewers call it toknenengg kasi diba. On top of this hill is this old, rusty, torn-up water tank with a lot of graffiti on it. On that hill is also a mango grove. They already built a concrete wall between the valley view and the Brookside. It sucks. I remember how my friends and I just come and go as we pleased back in the good old days. But anyways, here's what happened. When we were younger, we used to play with this boy who was a non-homeowner, or squatter. But as we grew older, we drifted apart and he went on to hang out with his junkie friends. Well, about 5 years ago, tragedy struck. We found out that this boy's body was found in toknenengg. And from what I heard, this boy suffered a great deal before he died. This boy was tortured to death. His ears and tongue were cut off. One of his eyes was hanging off of the socket. His murderers drilled holes in his inner thighs. Rumor has it that a fellow valley viewer did all this because he suspected him of stealing one of his goats. But it was so tragic. I felt bad for his family. My brother said that him and his friends were passing through BNT before they heard about his body being found. And his friends saw the blood-stained ground. Him and his friends then thought that it was the blood of some unfortunate dog. Little did they know that it was a spot where their childhood friend was murdered. Well, fast forward to 2000. I went back home last year to find a walled-up BNT, and with a new name, OL, overlooking. It has a pretty nice view. You have the Antipolo Hills to the east and the smog-ridden glittering lights of Manila to the west. One evening, my sister and her friends were hanging out at OL. All of them are from Valley View, except her friend Raul. He's from Antipolo. Well, according to my sister, Raul was so quiet most of the time they were up there. When they left, she asked him what's going on. Raul said that he was a bit of a psychic, and he said that while they were at OL, he kept seeing a guy in his teens staring at them from the tall grasses below them. He knows that this guy is not with the living anymore. He said, "Kawawa naman siya. Talagang nahirapan bago namatay. Poor him. He really struggled before he died." When my sister went home that evening, she told me about it, totally forgetting about the tragic incident that happened in that place years ago. So I said to her, "Diba dun pinatay si E? Is that where E was killed?" She got so scared when I reminded her about it. Raul never knew E. No one ever told Raul about him being murdered, his body being dumped over there. How sad, huh? E's earthbound spirit still restlessly roams the place. Sumalangi nawa ang iyong kaluluwa, E. May your soul go to heaven, E. This happened some time ago in one of the known condominiums in the business center, Ortigas, Pasig. A year after I graduated from college, I was hired as an online English teacher of a Korean company. I was assigned to work in the split shift, so they offered me to be a stay-in teacher in a company-owned condo unit, together with other teachers who worked in the same shift. I agreed to the offer. This is when all the horror started. The first night was okay. I can clearly remember that I was the only one in the bedroom because my roommates were still at work. I closed the door and was in total darkness. I've always been a sleepyhead. I can sleep wherever and whenever. The next day I met my roommates and co-teachers. They were all kind. The first and second week at work was smooth. Even the third week was. Until one night, somebody whispered in my ear while sleeping, "Tulugang mo ko. Help me." I woke up to it. We were 4 girls in the second bedroom, and there were 3 bedrooms in the condo. I was on the 2nd floor of the double-deck bed, so nobody will be able to reach me that high. Otherwise, I would feel the bed shaking. I ignored this incident, but it had already been 4 nights and I still hear the same voice, disturbing my sleep. It was then that me and my co-teachers were having dinner in the condo. They talked about a kid whom one of my co-teachers would see from time to time. One of my co-teachers asked my other co-teacher, "Do you still hear the girl?" My other co-teacher said not anymore. That rang a bell, so I asked them what it was about. My co-teacher told her story about how she would hear a girl asking for help while she was sleeping. I couldn't believe how her story was similar to what I am experiencing. I told them that I've been hearing somebody whispering in my ears for the past few days. They were thrilled upon hearing it, except for one of my roommates. She told us that she has been seeing the girl whispering in my ears every 2:30 to 3 a.m. She said she can see ghosts. Another revelation unraveled when they said the one I replaced experienced the same thing. That night, I slept next to my roommate who was sleeping on the 1st floor of the double deck. At last, I was able to sleep soundly. However, one night I decided to sleep on my assigned bed again. In the middle of my sleep, I suddenly woke up to pee. It was dim in the kitchen and living room. When I got out of the toilet, a very tall and dark creature was sitting in the kitchen. It was looking at my other co-teacher, who was then sleeping on the sofa in the living room. Suddenly I woke up to a scream. All of us gathered in the living room. We were all calming down my co-teacher, whom I saw in the dream. She was crying. I asked her, "Did you see the tall and dark creature?" Everybody was shocked when I asked her the question. We were all terrified. As nights went by, this thing happened every night to us. Being a Christian, I prayed and tried to be courageous, until I had enough. I was torn between pursuing this job or having a good night's sleep. After 3 months, I decided to just quit and return home. On my last day in the condominium, I told everyone that I will cook for them as a thank you and farewell. It was a Saturday, so some of my co-teachers went back home and some of them stayed. Unfortunately, I was not able to buy all the ingredients for the dishes. 3 of my co-teachers volunteered to buy the missing ingredients. Me and my 2 co-teachers were left in the condo. One of them was taking a shower, and the other was napping, and I was cooking for the early dinner. I heard, "Psst." It was a soft call. I didn't mind it. "Psst, psst." It got louder. "Psst, psst, psst." It was clear and audible. I was scared. This isn't a dream anymore, and it's daylight. I was about to call my co-teachers, who were with me, when the door opened. Thank God. My co-teachers returned from their grocery store. I told them about the sound I heard. They said they also experienced it once before. The food was ready, so we called our co-teacher who was taking a nap. For some reason, she couldn't get out. She got locked inside the room, which never happened before. Before 7 p.m., I left the condominium and didn't go back. The following week, I went back to the office to do some HR stuff. The HR asked me the real reason for my resignation. I told her everything. She said she could understand because it happened to her before, when she was still a teacher too. She advised me to never go back to the condominium as the entities might follow me. Up to now, I still do not know why these things happened to me and my co-teachers. Who these entities were and how the events connected to each other. I don't want to find out anymore. After a year, I landed a job in Japan. My friends teased me about how this country is more haunted than my country. However, in my almost 4 years of living here, I've never experienced any horrifying occurrences. Or at least, not yet. When I was a child, I used to see ghosts in our old apartment in Manila. Mostly, they were just blurry figures of a person that was just passing by. But one night, while I was late night watching TV, I saw a man standing on our stairs. The man was wearing all black, and I could clearly see his face. I could even see that he had a shaven head. He didn't look menacing. He was just looking. But I was so scared that I peed my pants. I told my mum about it, but she wouldn't believe me. My dad at the time was a delivery driver, so I barely saw him. We moved to another town a few years later. Decades later, while we were reminiscing about our life in Manila, I told my family how I used to see ghosts in our old apartment. My dad was shocked. He told us he used to see ghosts too. He asked me why I did not say anything. I said I told my mum, but she wouldn't believe me. My dad said he used to see a black figure of a man on our stairs whenever he came home from work. My younger brother told us that he used to see the same black figure around our house. Then, I told him I could see him clearly and described how he looked. My dad told us the reason why he had to do a blood sacrifice of a chicken is because of the ghosts he saw. He thought he was just too tired from work. And then, he told us the history of that apartment and who he thinks that ghost is. A few years before we moved into that apartment, there was a tenant who committed suicide by hanging himself on the stairs. He was a nursing student studying for his licensure exam, and he rented that apartment alone so he could focus. But due to the pressure from his father, who is a military man and beats him, he decided to end his life. Ironically, I am now working as a nurse, and my brother is in the military. We did not know this story until this year. An aswang is a monster in Filipino mythology that preys on pregnant women. Unlike the grisly attacks usually shown in horror movies, however, these monsters apparently just prey on the life essence of the unborn baby until it dies and the mother miscarries. The scary part is that these monsters are also part human, meaning they could literally be anyone during the day. This happened in Metro Manila around 2011. My cousin told me the old man with the new neighbors asked me if you were pregnant. I was shocked. I never even told my family yet. I was 21 and worked nights in a call center. I never go outside when I'm home, and I was only a few weeks along, so I know I wasn't showing yet. How did this nosy old man know? The said neighbors were new in town, coming from one of the more popular provinces in the Philippines, where witchcraft and aswangs are still the norm. They were friendly enough though, so no one really had anything bad to say about them, other than the nasty rumor that they know about aswang. When I was about 8 months along, I was watching late night TV with my brother at around 2 a.m. Something big landed on our tin roof, strong enough to rattle the windows. My brother and I looked at each other with wide eyes as we listened to the footsteps. Yes, footsteps. Stop right on top of us. I was never a prayerful person, but at that moment I called on gods and saints and angels to protect my baby. Then I remembered my grandmother's story about how she escaped an aswang attack by placing a pillow between her legs to mask the baby's scent. So I did just that. We had no idea how long we waited. Seconds, minutes. But we heard another jump and then silence. Until this day, I was glad that my brother was with me to vouch for me. I still can't believe it happened, and it happened to me. Then I remembered the nosy old man. Could it have been him? Just something weird and mysterious, I suppose. I was a skeptic and don't have many experiences with the paranormal, but with the very few I've had, this one probably had the most impact. Back in college, I used to volunteer for a college group that organized regular recollection retreat weekends for college students. I live in the Philippines, which is primarily a Catholic country, so this was a normal thing. One of our usual venues was an old dormitory in one of our most prestigious universities in the Philippines. It's popular not only for the education they offer, but also due to their rich history. They've been around since the 1860s and have also played a part during World War II. The dormitory we used was quite small, just enough to make it easy for everyone to move around during the activities. It was a 2-story rectangular-shaped building. The first floor had the dining area and the kitchen. Most of the major activities were held on the second floor since it had both the conference room and the small chapel. These rooms were on opposite sides of a long hallway, while the bedrooms and comfort rooms were spread across the hall. There was one activity that was performed during the late hours of the night. All the lights were turned off, and the whole venue was only lit up with candles. The activity involved multiple stations for each participant to go around to. The final station of the activity would be the small chapel on the second floor. Each participant was to be accompanied by one volunteer so they can assist them in moving around the dark. But only participants were allowed inside the stations, while the volunteers would wait outside. It was already way past midnight, and we were on the last rounds of the activity. Most participants had already reached the final station. Also, almost all the volunteers were waiting in one place. We were sitting there quietly and checked which of the volunteers and their participants had not yet still reached the final station. We counted that there was still around 2 or 3 to go, so we waited patiently. After a few minutes, our silence was broken by the sound of crying and running footsteps from the other end of the hall. It was running towards our direction. We felt more worried than scared because this was a familiar voice. We figured it was one of our volunteers. Eventually, she emerged from the dark. She was covering her face tightly and was trying hard not to let out her sobs. We couldn't get anything from her as she was so hard in panic for her to speak. When she calmed down a bit, we asked what happened. With a struggle, she explained to us how she was in the comfort room across the hall beside the conference room. When she got out of the stall, she was surprised to see an unaccompanied participant in the comfort room. The participant was facing the sink. The volunteer stopped the story from there. With wide eyes, she asked us in Filipino, "Do we have a candidate or volunteer who is wearing a tank top and striped pants?" No one answered. When she saw the confused looks on our faces, she cried again and shouted. She turned towards me, and she was faceless. No one knew what to say. We didn't know whether to believe it or not. We just tried to calm her down. Nothing was mentioned about the incident the following day. I guess we all decided to just forget about it, or to believe that it was just fatigue that made her see things. The regular retreats went on consistently. We would still use the same venue multiple times, and no similar incident happened. A year after, I was invited to volunteer again. No volunteer from the incident was able to say yes to the invite since they were all busy, as most of them were already in their senior year of college. All of the activities went smoothly. During the second night, as everyone was starting to prepare for bed, I made rounds to all the bedrooms to check if any of the participants needed anything. Everyone was pleasant and was just happy to get some rest. As I was about to leave one of the rooms, one of the participants approached me to ask, "Is there a volunteer wearing a tank top and striped pants?" I was stunned. This participant was a total stranger to any of the previous volunteers. There was no way he knew about that story before that weekend. I never got to answer him back. I just left the room and told nobody until the end of that weekend. When I was still in the Philippines, my parents would take me and my other siblings to their home province in what you would call the countryside. We always loved going there, since it really marked the beginning of summer vacation, away from the city, away from school, and most of all my other cousins. And our clan is so huge that these vacations really turn into family reunions. We, I guess you can say, have a house there, our ancestral home, where my great-grandparents and their parents, and maybe their parents as well, have called home. But the happy togetherness feeling is not what my story is about. And here is where things start to turn, let's just say, weird. On that year, sometime in the mid-90s, not all of my cousins were vacationing, so it was just a few of us. On top of that, it was a wet season, rainy to stormy, most of the time. We were inside the house, unable to play outside due to the heavy rains. And if you were a Filipino kid who grew up in the 90s, you know very well about the blackouts or brownouts, electrical failures that happen during stormy weather. So as we all expected, a brownout occurred. We children then hurried to light the candles and oil lamps to illuminate the sudden embrace of darkness. This would always turn into a very good opportunity to start sharing ghost stories. Now, I have always been a scaredy young girl, flinching at the slightest squeak or any small sound from a dark corner that I could not readily give an explanation to. My cousins enjoyed scaring the wits out of me when there were brownouts back then, and their stories are so ghastly that the images they conjured in my head were just too real. Well, on this particular night, I asked that they do not make their stories so horribly scary, to the point that I could not go to the washroom without somebody accompanying me. They would chuckle, but agreed. Then we decided to start our storytelling session. My eldest cousin was the master storyteller. He really knew how to build the right atmosphere that can really make all of us scream and run for our parents. He has this uncanny ability that he waits for the perfect opportunity and setting, sometimes not saying a word till it is dead quiet, harnessing the sounds of crickets, dogs barking from afar, trees whistling in the dark of the night, that sometimes I wonder if it was all coincidence or he really controlled these anomalies. As the rain started to lighten, slowly and slowly, until not a single drop were to be heard, my cousin told us to listen as he tells his first story. It was about a young woman who was about to get married, who happened to be a resident of our town, Barrio, back in the days of the Spanish occupation. This woman was thought to be the most beautiful woman in town, that men from neighboring towns and even provinces would come visit her for a chance to woo her and perhaps win her heart. She was also congenial, never turning away a suitor. It was said that she had met with all her suitors during the time, and this only helped spread her identity farther. Until one day, a single man showed up in front of her house. It was a local town farmer of about the same age. He was simple yet humble, hardworking and religious. She immediately took a liking to him, to the dismay of most of her other suitors. One of her suitors happened to be a powerful Spanish plantation owner with direct ties with the church, and another who was a Spanish officer. They conspired to get rid of this simple farmer, and they did. They took the farmer down to a nearby lake and was said to have shot him in the back of the head and then left him floating on the water's surface. Upon learning this, the woman was very heartbroken, so much so that she drowned herself in the same lake, a lake that happens to be not far from where our ancestral home is. To make things worse, before her tragic end, she was said to have vowed to never bring peace to the lives of the descendants of the two Spanish gentlemen responsible for killing her beloved farmer. And then, my cousin suddenly mentioned, today happens to be the day she died 300 years ago, and in case you all didn't know, we have Spanish blood in us. And we live close by this lake. Think about it. That quickly sent chills up our spine. Me personally could not move from where I was seated. But then again I thought, it was just a story. After this story was told, my other cousins decided to get some water to drink. Then from the dark living room, only lighted by one candle, I saw somebody emerge from the left, approaching me. I squinted and recognized it as my mum wearing her sleeping dress, or duster as it is called, and sat not too far from where I'm seated. That is when my other cousin decided she was thirsty too and got up, leaving only me and my mum in the living room. My mum then said she'd like to go outside as it is hot inside the house. Believe it or not, even after a long and heavy cold rain in the Philippines, the 30 degrees Celsius weather still lingers, especially inside people's homes. I then thought that would be a good idea since I, too, felt kind of hot. The terrace was just outside, although the seats are going to be wet, so I knew my mum wouldn't want to sit there. So we just stood out there, enjoying the fresh, cool breeze. Inside, I could hear that all my cousins had come back from the kitchen and they were all calling for me. One of them asked where I was, and I yelled back that I'm outside on the terrace, and they started calling me to come inside. My mum then looked by the lake. After hearing about the story, I asked my mum if the stories were true. I was surprised when she nodded, thinking my mum couldn't possibly believe in such stories. She started walking towards our garden, which is, strangely enough, the direction where the lake is. The flowers were in full bloom, especially with all the rain that we had lately at that time. So much so that I also felt like checking out the beautiful red roses that were fully blossomed. Then my mum glanced her head back, and I caught a glimpse of the side of her face that would be forever etched into my memory. Just blank white for eyes, and her mouth stretched to her earlobes and began to smile. That is when I woke up from what seemed to be a stupor, and I heard my cousins hysterically shouting, "Christy, bilis!" which is translated to, "Christy, hurry." Before I could make sense of it all, I just instinctively started running towards them, and I began to cry when I realized I've walked outside of the confines of our house and was halfway towards the lake. And to make matters worse, I was being followed by what seemed to be a floating white dress. I did not bother to analyze who or what it was. I just kept running towards my horrified cousins, who were peering out the window from inside the house. I then recognized my sister crying while shouting, telling me to hurry and never look back. When I got inside the gate, apparently, I got the feeling that I wasn't being chased anymore. My aunt's dogs were suddenly baring their teeth, growling at whoever or whatever was behind me. Being a religious family, the gate was also adorned with crosses. And by the time I got inside, we all heard the most sinister laugh, a laugh that I suddenly remembered as I wrote this story. Not something you'd want to hear, believe me. I continued crying while all my other cousins came to me, reassuring me I'm safe now. It was such an unforgettable story that every time I recall the event, I can't help but wonder, what would have happened if I did not hear my cousins yelling?
Hello watchers and listeners, thank you so much for watching. As always, a big thank you to all of the Reddit users who kindly allowed me to use their stories. If you want to help support this channel, you will find links to both my Patreon and my Teespring store in the description below, so feel free to have a look. And the biggest thank you to all of you who continue to support me. I truly do appreciate it. And remember,
Papa loves you.